the Roman Empire, a civilization that dominated the known world for centuries. From the rolling hills of Italy to the deserts of Africa, the forests of Germania to the fertile lands of Egypt, Rome's influence was everywhere. Its armies were unmatched, disciplined, and feared. Its architecture awe-inspiring, from the Colosseum to aqueducts that carried life-sustaining water across hundreds of miles. And its laws, the foundation upon which much of the modern world is built. Rome was a beacon of civilization, a society that inspired awe and reverence. Yet, by the 5th century AD, all of this grandeur, all of this power came crashing down. The mighty Roman Empire, once thought eternal, was no more. Most history books offer simple answers. They blame barbarian invasions, the Goths, the Vandals, the Huns, or weak leaders who couldn't hold the empire together. Others point to economic decline or political instability. While these factors were certainly part of the story, the real truth is far more complex and far more unexpected. Rome didn't fall merely because others attacked it. In many ways, it collapsed because of what was happening inside its own walls. Let's begin with the invasions. Yes, history's most famous invaders played their part. The Goths swept through the Balkans, the Vandals crossed the Mediterranean to sack Carthage, and the Huns, led by Attila, terrorized the provinces. These events were dramatic, frightening, and highly destructive. But here's the twist. The empire did not fall simply because of foreign armies. In numerous instances, Roman generals could and did repel invaders. The borders of the empire, though vast and difficult to defend, were not inherently undefendable. The true weakness lay deeper, within the very structure of Roman society and governance. Imagine a city where corruption is not the exception, but the rule. Officials purchased positions of power, and military ranks were often given to those who could afford them, rather than to those who deserved them. Soldiers, many of whom were unpaid or underpaid, pledged loyalty not to the empire, but to the generals who commanded them, or to whoever offered them the most gold. Taxes crushed ordinary citizens, leaving farmers struggling to feed their families, artisans barely scraping by, and merchants struggling to sustain trade. Power became a game of bribery and self-interest rather than responsibility or service. Rome's administration, once a model of efficiency and organization, began to rot from the inside. Some historians refer to this as moral decay. I prefer a more human explanation: a loss of trust. When citizens lose faith in their leaders, when the people no longer believe that those in power care for the common good, no wall, no army, and no strategy can save a civilization. Rome's people were still proud, still loyal in small ways, but the glue that held the empire together, the sense of shared purpose and mutual responsibility, was eroding. Without it, even the most sophisticated military campaigns could not hold back the tide of decline. The economy, often cited as a secondary factor, was a much more potent threat than most realize. Rome minted coins in staggering quantities, slowly devaluing their currency. Inflation soared, eroding the wealth of ordinary citizens and creating a situation where even the most basic goods became difficult to afford. Food shortages became increasingly common, especially in urban centers where the population was heavily dependent on imported grain. And yet, the deeper issue was cultural. Rome's obsession with luxury made the economic crisis far worse than it needed to be. The elite demanded exotic goods, silks from China, spices from India, ivory from Africa, and rare perfumes from distant lands. These items required complex trade networks, enormous resources, and immense wealth. Meanwhile, the majority of Roman citizens struggled to survive. Inequality reached catastrophic levels. The empire wasn't collapsing simply because it was invaded. It was collapsing because it could no longer sustain its own population, because it was failing to feed, protect, and provide for the people who made its greatness possible. And then there was the army. Once the pride of Rome, the legions had become a double-edged sword. Mercenaries from barbarian tribes were increasingly hired to defend the empire's borders. These soldiers fought for pay, not honor, and their loyalty was often temporary. Some switched sides mid-battle, persuaded by promises of gold, land, or favor from the opposing forces. Rome's greatest weapon, its army, had turned into one of its greatest vulnerabilities. Imagine a fortress where the guards could be bribed to open the gates for anyone with enough silver. That is what Rome had become. Religion played a more subtle but equally transformative role. Christianity, which began as a persecuted faith, gradually became the dominant religion of the empire. By the time Constantine embraced it in the early 4th century, the spiritual landscape of Rome had fundamentally changed. Civic duty, military service, and loyalty to the state were no longer the highest virtues. Instead, the focus shifted toward the afterlife, toward spiritual fulfillment rather than worldly power. The empire lost a core component of its identity, its unifying cultural and moral force. Rome was no longer just a political entity, it had become a spiritual one as well. And while faith can inspire, it can also distract, particularly when survival and governance are at stake. Even nature seemed to conspire against Rome. Evidence suggests that climate change, crop failures, and recurring plagues devastated populations throughout the empire. The Antonine Plague, for example, killed millions in the 2nd century AD, long before the empire's official fall. Subsequent waves of disease, coupled with declining agricultural yields, weakened Rome's ability to recover from economic shocks or military threats. Imagine trying to manage an empire when your fields are empty, when your cities are dying, when famine and disease are spreading unchecked. Rome was not simply under attack. It was slowly starving internally and externally. Political instability further compounded the problem. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome experienced the so-called crisis of the 3rd century, a period during which over 20 emperors claimed the throne. Assassinations, coups, and civil wars became alarmingly common. This political chaos undermined central authority and made coordinated responses to external threats nearly impossible. Every new ruler faced the daunting task of convincing the people and the army that they were legitimate, while simultaneously fending off rivals both inside and outside the empire. By the time Diocletian and Constantine attempted to stabilize the empire, the damage had already been done. So, if you ask why Rome fell, the answer is not simple. It was not just a foreign invasion, a failed economy, or weak leadership. It was a perfect storm of interrelated, unexpected factors. Systemic corruption, widening economic inequality, reliance on mercenary armies, cultural and religious transformation, environmental pressures, and political chaos. Each factor alone could have been managed. Together, they created an unstoppable momentum toward decline. The fall of Rome was not a sudden catastrophe. It was a long, drawn-out unraveling, a slow collapse that spanned centuries. It was the gradual disintegration of trust, identity, and cohesion. By the time the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 AD, the empire had already lost much of its vitality. The physical act of invasion was merely a symptom, not the cause of a civilization in decline. Perhaps the most shocking reason of all is this: no empire can survive when its people, its economy, and its culture no longer believe in it. Trust, fairness, and shared purpose are more powerful than armies, walls, or treasures. Rome teaches us that power alone is fragile. Civilization depends on the social and moral fabric that binds people together, the unseen glue that holds society in place. When that glue dissolves, even the mightiest empire becomes vulnerable to collapse. In the end, Rome did not vanish overnight. It faded, piece by piece, until the world it once dominated was irrevocably transformed. The empire's fall was not just a historical event. It was a cautionary tale for every civilization that followed. It reminds us that greatness is never guaranteed, that even the most powerful societies are fragile when they neglect the trust, loyalty, and welfare of their people. And so, the Roman Empire's story is not just one of armies and emperors, of battles and invasions. It is the story of humanity itself, a reminder that civilizations rise and fall not only because of external threats, but because of what happens within. When power, wealth, and faith become unbalanced, when trust erodes, and when people no longer feel part of a shared purpose, no wall, no army, no law, and no ruler can save them. Rome did not fall because it was weak. Rome fell because it forgot what made it strong. And that might be the most shocking reason of all.